chokwadi pasi pano taiona moto marongera vanoita wepanyika vanoda kudisu vamwe tioneswe moto dai pasina kupindira kwaishe chokwadi pasi pano taiona moto marongera vanoita wepanyika vanoda kudisu vamwe tioneswe moto.
The Chief of Mission, Mr. Elmar Brock. And let me introduce the panel to you. So to my left, we have Ambassador Timo Olkonen, who is the ambassador of the EU delegation to Zimbabwe. Then we have the Chief of Mission, as I mentioned, Mr. Elmar Brock. And we have Ms. Irene Maria Gunari, team leader and electoral expert of the EU election follow-up mission as well. So in terms of the agenda this morning, we're just going to have a brief introduction by Ambassador Olkonen, and then Mr. Brock will also go through the findings, after which we'll have a Q&A session, and then we will close. And in terms of just general housekeeping issues, the toilets are outside on either side of the entrance, and after the entire press conference, we're also going to have some teas available at the back of the room. Okay, and without further ado, I'll allow Mr. Olkonen to begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra, and ladies and gentlemen of the media, good morning. Welcome to this press briefing, also on my behalf. Just a very brief explanation why we have been gathered here today. So we indeed have the electoral follow-up mission in town, and as a brief explanation of what an electoral follow-up mission is, an EFM, is that we have a in the European Union election observation methodology, it's not only about the election day and when observers are sent out and see how things happen. It's about preparing for those elections. We have long-term observers before the missions, and then we also have a follow-up. European Union, fully fledged European election observation missions are big events. They are big investments, and it is important, and by far, like 2018, by far, the European Union Election Observation Mission in 2018 in Zimbabwe was by far the biggest international election observation mission around. And it's important from the methodology of the EU election observation that you don't leave it there, but then you also follow up. Democracy is a process, it's a continuous process, and then the idea with an electoral follow-up mission is that then it's coming back to look what has happened ever since in 2018. A number of recommendations were made in 2018 by the EOM, 23 to be precise, and then the mission has been here then to look of where we are in the implementation of those. Obviously, what the European Union can do is only to recommend. We can't prescribe. Zimbabwe obviously is an independent democratic country that takes its own decisions, but we are here to support the democratic processes with the means that we can, and election observation is one of those ways to do it. So indeed, we were hoping that the electoral follow-up mission would have been here much earlier, but because of the COVID situation, it was postponed until now, when it has been possible to have it in place. The EU electoral observation missions and also the electoral follow-up missions are independent missions, so they are, while the delegation is there to give them support, and the whole External Action Service of the European Union is to render support for the electoral observation. It's important also from a methodology perspective that they do their assessment independently from whatever engagements we might have otherwise in our respective countries. So just to make also that point, and on that line, I would also then, on my behalf, also request that when you're addressing the discussion and pose questions, that please let's discuss about the mission and not overall EU engagement in Zimbabwe, on which case the theme I would promise to come back to you in other media engagements. So indeed, but we are very happy to have the chief of the Electoral Observation Mission, the chief observer, Mr. Elmar Brok, who was also here in 2018, in town this week. He has been supported by experts who have been here for several weeks. And indeed, it's a pleasure to have you back here, Mr. Brok. And indeed, with that, I think I can hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this introduction. Thank you very much for coming. It's nice to be back in this country after 4 years, this wonderful country, and see the development in this country. So, and we met a lot of friends on every level here, and we had always open and mostly friendly discussions and conversations in the last days. And that was, in my opinion, quite productive in the run-up of the next election in this country. It's our normal role that after some time, after the elections, we come back to a country to listen to the stakeholders, authorities, in which way, in their opinion, or recommendation was considered to be useful. Unfortunately, the Parliament was not able to find a time for us to meet. But we have met with civil society, journalists, with the Media Commission, with the Central Electoral Commission. We met with churches, civil society, I think said before, and we saw also what is, in our opinion, most important in this procedure, the Minister of Justice, but also the Foreign Minister, if I have not forgotten someone. And then the political parties, both from opposition and from government. That was even in the beginning of the first day. Look, we had made, after 2018, 23 recommendations. We sent to the institutions and stakeholders in these countries, which includes 10 priority ones, aiming and aligning the Electoral Act with the 2013 Constitution, strengthening the independence of the SEC, and increasing its information sharing throughout the electoral process, improving voter registration as well as the transparency, verifiability, and integrity of the results management process, introducing legal measures to mitigate abuse of state measures, developing regulations and on political party financing, reforming the state-owned media to fully guarantee the independence and impartiality, and holding regular meetings of the multi-party liaison committees throughout the electoral process. We strongly encourage all political parties and stakeholders in consultation with civil society to engage in good faith deliberations to amend the electoral legislation well in advance of the 2023 elections to avoid uncertainty and allow sufficient time for implementation and voter education. The government and the parliament carry here special responsibilities. The goal must be free, transparent, credible, and impartial elections. I think because of a lot of reasons, we have a feeling that here we are late in the time frame. But we heard yesterday from the Minister of Justice that the proposals, the recommendations, but also especially the proposals by the CEC, is in the end of considering in interministerial consultations to come up to a bill proposal which will be done this summer before the summer break, winter break. I'm now in European terms, but until July, and that the parliamentary consultations and decision-making procedure will be finished until the beginning of December. That makes it a short time for implementation, we have to see, and we have to see that here is a special responsibility to have that proper process, and because we do not know what is in detail in this, will be in this bill, I cannot make also statements on that, what will be in that bill, but I can only make general remarks in that question. To date, progress on the implementation of the EU EOM recommendation has been limited, with the majority of the priority ones not yet adequately addressed. So far we can see it. The EFM welcomes that stakeholder consultation on some legal reforms have been taken or are ongoing, but notes with concern that the adoption of important reforms such as amendments to the Electoral Act remain outstanding. The timing I told you. Furthermore, the mission appreciates initiatives made by the CEC to increase its engagement through efforts are needed to fully respond to its role as an independent and transparent election management body. This includes that there is more transparency on every step of the electoral process on local, regional and national level. I think that is considered by us as a real progress to do that also on a local and regional level, and if it's done constantly, this might also be helpful that this can have the concerns about the level playing field on local and regional level can be minimized, which will be helpful for electoral peace, that question, and that all the stakeholders have the chance to put their concerns on every level in such a debate of the multi-party liaison committee. If the authorities and the legislators do not address recurring problems related to voter registration, constituency delimitation, level playing field in the campaign, partisan behavior of traditional leaders and public administrations, freedoms and of expression, assembly and of the media, they will undermine progress towards achieving an environmental conducive to a greater level of public trust in the electoral process and peaceful elections. We are concerned, that is a new thing what we learned in this debate and discussions here, and that is not part of our recommendations. We are considered that if the private voluntary organizations amendment bill is adopted, it will severely impact the freedom of association and restrict legitimate activities of civil society organizations, as we learned in debates with some of the stakeholders here. Therefore, we hope that the authorities of the legislature and the legislature can reconsider keeping in mind Zimbabwe's international commitment. We had also concerns from part of the opposition and civil society that amendments to the criminal law might be introduced and which would endanger the freedom of expression. The EU Follow-up Mission will publish a final report with conclusions in the beginning of June 2022. The full archive that you can retrieve, where you can get the further papers. I think that is the general statement. I'm now open for discussions to become more clearer and detailed in questions which might find you interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. So now we will open up for Q&As, and I would just ask that if you're posing a question that you please introduce yourself and the organization or the media company that you're with prior to posing your question. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Columbus Mavunga with Voice of America TV. You might have said this, but I think you kept on jumping and all. I wanted to know, Mr. Brook, Zimbabwe is already in the election mood for 2023. What are the major concerns that you think should be addressed before the next election?
I have partly mentioned it. What are our recommendations, and especially the 10 priorities of these recommendations, which I could read you alone if you want to do so. But we see certain shortcomings still, but I do not know whether at the end of the day it will be shortcomings, because we do not know the final bill for the Electoral Act. That is the consideration. And I think an important point is voters' registration, for example. We have understood all the technical difficulties with that, but if people say that around 2 million young people have difficulty to get to voters' registration, not just because of the registration, but all the questions which have to do with making the documentation complete from the birth certificate and onwards to get an identity card, then here might come in a problem. And I think if so many people, because of these technical questions, cannot vote, it will not help, as especially young people are satisfied in such a countries, because they cannot express their opinion in election. And there is also the question that has to do with to conduct constituency delimitation, and to have that as an early, fast, and transparent process, to mention that. And we need credibility, not we. Zimbabwe's citizens need credibility. What has to do with the strengthening of the independence of the SEC from governments and other stakeholders' oversight on the approval of its own regulations and of the conduct of things, and the complaints which are coming out from stakeholders. And here were concerns in the last elections, especially in the last 2 weeks of the campaign and the days after, so that therefore to get a clarification, not just in law, but also that it is credible, that it in practice, it's an important point. It's extensive reforms in the media sector, following the 2008 harmonized elections, such as the licensing of community radios, the repeal of the respective AIPPA, and the adoption of new laws indicate a certain progress towards the harmonization of existing media regulations with the Constitution. However, although the media liberalization process is ongoing, they are concerned that some of these reforms are not in line with the letter and the spirit of the 2013 Constitution, and do not reflect a genuine opening of the media space that would enhance diversity and plurality. For instance, also the Data Protection Act includes some progressive provisions. It also criminalizes the transmission of data messages inciting violence or damage to property, and of data messages which is seen sometimes as alibis, knowing to be false with the intent to cause psychological or economic harm, with harsh penalties foreseen, as the vague terms used in this provision could lead to an abusive interpretation and application by the courts. The Data Protection Act is perceived by EU, EFM interlocutors as sponsoring self-censorship. And we have to see also the question of level playing field, which has not to do just also with media conditions and other conditions, but also the question of such transparent elections in the rural areas, and the role of traditional leaders and civil servants, and the need of introducing explicit regulation on campaign finance and expenditure. I think everyone in this country understands what is meant by that. Is that enough, or could deliver you a few proposals more?
I think we can take the next question. Corner there.
The man in the country shirt.
Good morning. My name is Lovejoy from 26 Richard. Mr. Brock, you talked about the PVO bill, which is like one of the hotly contested issues right now in Zimbabwe. Maybe from your assessment, I would want to understand what do you think its implications on the 2023 elections? And also, I understand you met government officials, and from the response from government spokesperson, it says that you didn't agree on certain aspects of the PVO bill.
Look, I cannot make statements on the details of the legislation. That is also up to your country. But we know experience with similar laws in other countries. And we see that it's considered by citizens in your country, especially from the civil society, as limiting the room of maneuver of civil society and freedom of expression. So that people consider, rightly or wrongly, that it would be dangerous for them to involve in public debate in a certain way. And I have sometimes the feeling that even that has, in our discussions we had, implications in the mind of people to become cautious before even it's law, and that it's always dangerous. We see, and that is the same question we have to see to the criminal law, that there is always a difficulty of definition. We are very much supporting everyone who is against violence in election campaigns and against hatred speech. But it's in vague way formulated that everyone who is in opposition in certain questions is accused to be unpatriotic, destroying the image of that country speaks with one language and whatsoever. Then it becomes an instrument not for freedom of speech, but an instrument against it in practice. And it might be also understood within the judicial system. And here we see a certain danger, and therefore we just asked the authorities to have a look into that in order to avoid such possibilities by a clear definition.
I think we'll take the next question now.
It's silent when nobody says something.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, sure, thank you.
Okay, in your statement, you also mentioned that you welcome that stakeholder consultations on some legal reforms have taken place. Are you at liberty maybe to share with us which ones in particular?
I have not seen I did not get it.
Okay, in your statement you say that you welcome that stakeholder consultations on some legal reforms have taken place. Maybe I would want to understand which ones in particular are you sort of welcoming, are you sort of pleased with?
Thank you very much. And yes, there were also in some legislation some progress in these questions, but I said some, it's limited, because this is also part of the legislation which has still to be done, which I mentioned where we'll see the bill just in July, which is relatively late in that question, and therefore I think the point is that the election follow-up mission was informed that consultation in regard to the amendment of the Electoral Act are ongoing, and the bill is scheduled to be submitted to the Parliament in this summer. The mission welcomes this development and invites all political parties to engage in deliberation in the Parliament in good faith, aiming at achieving a consensus at the bill so that it will be presented to the President for assent and signature before the end of the year. Any further delays risk not allocating sufficient time to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to prepare successfully and to also conduct extensive voter education on the new law before 2023. That is one of the examples of the classical questions that one point is law, but the other question is the implementation of the law and the implementation of the law in the right spirit. And to do that, to get that must be transparent and relatively fast before the elections. Otherwise, it comes to be complicated to achieve the goal.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
I'm sorry about that. My name is Anna Chibamu from newszimbabwe.com. My question to you, Mr. Brock, is you mentioned that you also wanted to meet a parliament as one of the stakeholders when you came to Zimbabwe. And I would want to know, since you failed to meet parliament officials, does that have an impact or I would say an impact on what we're supposed to discuss with them, because Parliament is it passes and makes laws.
It's an unfortunate situation where we have no responsibility for. But we have to see that we had discussions with parts of the opposition and with the governmental party. Even the governmental party has promised us to send us in a written way their opinion on certain questions, which we have not yet received. They told us we will get it yesterday, but perhaps we will get it today from them. So there were extensive discussions with them. And we have to see that our part of our delegation will stay for another week in the country, and perhaps that part of the delegation will stay here another week, will have the possibilities to talk to parliamentary authorities about these questions. We will only complete our report after we got the full information we could achieve in the course of this stay here. That includes also next week. So the parliament has good, but perhaps the parliament gives us a good opportunity to make use of their opinion. But in that stage, anyway, it was very much important that we talk to the parties themselves who are represented in parliament. So that indirectly we had the contacts. And secondly, it was important now to talk to the administration, because at this moment, it's the moment for the administration to make the proper proposals, which has then to become into parliamentary deliberations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Any more questions from anybody? Okay. I think if there are no further questions, at this point we will wrap up today's press conference. I'd like to just say thank you to each of our panelists here today, and also a big thank you to you all for attending. I would just like to remind any of you that may not have signed in the sign-in sheet to please do so. It will help us maintain a good contact database for future media events. But otherwise, thank you once again for attending. There are going to be teas served at the back of the room. You're welcome to stay for a while. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and the best for your country, and have a nice weekend. And if someone wants to approach me individually, I'm available for him or her.
Possibility to control via complaints there, that on all levels there will be a proper conduct of elections. That means it's questions like from the very whole line, setting up the voters' roll, printing of the election documents, distribution of the ballot sheets, the conduct on election day, the transparency, and then counting and the collection of the counts to the final results. And here must be the possibility for all stakeholders in a transparent process, because if that is transparent and clear and no loopholes, then is that the best way to have peace in a country, because nobody can say there was something which was wrong with the elections. Therefore, it's for everyone a good thing to get credibility of election by doing so. Oh, you speak German.
Are you happy with the pace that you're taking in addressing? Are you happy with the pace that you're taking in trying to address this issue?
The pace?
You're taking to address the issues.
And the pace is very slowly. And it's lost a lot of times where we got arguments. But if it's not done until final legislation, until the end of this year, and it's put into law by the signature of the president, then there's a very short time only to implement it. And the implementation is equally important than the legislation itself. What happens to the legislation if it's no time to implement it?
Do you think that the 2024 harmonized elections will be free and fair? From what you have said,
look, the recommendations we and others have made, including the Senate, aim to make it a free, transparent, credible, impartial election. And we hope that can be achieved. If we would believe it could not be achieved, then we would not be here. And therefore, it's up to the authorities now to create, after the experience of 2018, the environment for that, both in legislation and in implementation.